After the temple was purchased in Watseka, I was transferred from Laguna to Los Angeles. I was living on La Cienega Boulevard. My service was, the first service they gave me was working with Bhavananda to prepare Srila Prabhupada's quarters for him to live in them. So I was painting, hammering nails and sanding and preparing his room. So I believe the first time he really may have noticed me was when he moved into his apartment, and the crew that had been there working, we were there to greet him. And I never forget that he sat down behind his desk and he pulled out a bag of cookies and he handed each of us a cookie. And we ate the cookie, and then he said, "Now you must go wash your hands and feet. You must always do this after eating." And shortly after that, there was an incident that I remember fondly. It was one Sunday, the Sunday feast was on La Cienega Boulevard. But after the feast, I came back to work, and at that time I was painting in the ceiling of the temple room. I was working on a scaffold, and I thought I was the only one in the temple, and I was singing Hare Krishna mantra quite loudly and not paying too much attention to anything else, chanting and painting. I happened to glance down, and Srila Prabhupada was standing on the floor, surrounded by the temple president, who's Gargamuni and Karandar, and I think Brahmananda was there. And I was stunned. So I scampered down from this scaffold, and I offered my obeisances to Srila Prabhupada. And I was kneeling on the floor with my hands folded in front of him. And he looked at me and he folded his hands and he said, "Thank you very much." And afterwards, the devotees told me that when they had brought Srila Prabhupada over from the temple, and they told me that when they drove up, they could hear me singing, and Srila Prabhupada had asked them to be quiet, and they listened to my chanting as they walked into the temple, and then they'd been listening as I'd been painting, and they were watching down below. So Srila Prabhupada appreciated the loud chanting. In those days, he would come on Monday evenings to La Cienega Temple and give a lecture. And we would be always waiting outside. All the devotees would line the sidewalks. And when he drove up, we'd all bow down, and Srila Prabhupada walked down the line of devotees. Sometimes he'd pat a devotee on the head, and sometimes he wouldn't. And you were always trying to understand whether he was accepting your service or not. And it seems that if he patted you, you felt that I'm not worthy, he's just giving me some encouragement. And if he wouldn't, you felt the same thing. There was another incident. Once we moved into the new temple on Watseka Avenue, and Srila Prabhupada was giving Sri Upanishad classes every day. And one incident, which is pretty famous, is that he asked after the class one day, he asked, "Is everyone chanting 16 rounds?" And I was pretty naive, and I raised my hand. I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm not chanting 16 rounds. And Srila Prabhupada looked at me. "Oh, why? Why you're not chanting 16 rounds? Srila Prabhupada, I'm working 20 hours a day, and the temple president doesn't give me sufficient time to chant." "Then sleep 2 hours. Chant 16 rounds. And you could hear the shudder in the devotees' hearts. Later I found that pretty much no one was chanting 16 rounds because it was the philosophy of the leaders that work was more important than chanting. And of course, Srila Prabhupada strongly said, don't diminish your work for the chanting, diminish your sleep. And so I took it seriously, and I would spend my late nights standing in the hot water closet trying to finish my rounds. I distinctly remember my initiation, of course, because it was something you dream of and pray for and wait for innumerable lifetimes. But in particular, when Srila Prabhupada was there, and he said, "Bill Prabhu, come forward." He said, "Your name is Bhakta Das," handed me my beads. And he said, "This name means that you are the servant of the devotees. The more you think of yourself as a servant, the more you will advance in spiritual life. The more you think you're becoming a master, the faster you will go to hell. So in that one sentence, he pretty much summarized the essence of Krishna consciousness philosophy. And over the years, I meditate on it over and over and over again, and have attempted to serve the devotees from whatever means I can. And I've found that it is, without any doubt, the mercy of the devotees that helps one to advance in spiritual life, much more than the mercy of Krishna. You know, our philosophy is that we get the mercy of Krishna is to get our guru. And the mercy of the guru, or the mercy of the devotees, is to get Krishna. And we oftentimes, of course, in the neophyte stage, Kanishta level of devotees, we worship the deity and we neglect the devotees. Or we give respect to the, quote, big devotees, swamis, gurus, but we neglect the ordinary devotees. And in this way, you know, I know I'm guilty of every variety of offense, but, you know, I keep hearing these words of Srila Prabhupada again and again, echoing in my mind, become the servant of the devotees. And I finally concluded that the highest service is to serve the newest devotee, the youngest devotee, because he's taken the bold step to try to leave the material world. And if you help him, then you're really helping the Krishna consciousness movement. Because the people that are already mature in devotional service, of course, don't need so much help. Once I was in San Diego, and I became temple president, and I started having to write to him once a month and give each temple president was supposed to write every month and give Srila Prabhupada a report on the activities of the particular center. I started writing my first letter, I believe, in January of 1971. I was so nervous, I agonized over every word, every comma, wanting to try and make it perfect. It probably took me weeks to write the letter. And Srila Prabhupada wrote back and he said, "It appears Krishna has his blessings on you. Now you just make sure that all of our principles are followed, and then there will never be any scarcity." So I found that to be invaluable instruction, and I still try to live by that, that we should have faith that Krishna will maintain and protect his devotees if we are obedient to our spiritual master. I asked him, should I get married? Because I was a brahmachari, and within my mind I was determined I'm going to remain a brahmachari in this life. I never had a girlfriend before I joined the movement. I felt that Krishna had protected me, and I felt that I could continue. And then some of our senior men in Los Angeles started telling me that I should marry various girls. And this just totally destroyed my mental equilibrium. I started thinking about getting married, and I asked him, and he said, as far as your getting married is concerned, it is better if you can remain a brahmachari. But he didn't say no or yes, it wasn't specific. And eventually, then there was some talk, after this visit to San Diego in 1972, there was some talk that I should take sannyas. And then I had to really search in my heart where I'm at, and I concluded that, you know, every time a pretty girl walks in the temple, my mind would be attracted to her, or I'd think of her, and I said, I don't want to take sannyas under this condition. When I take sannyas, I want to be free of this. So I went and got married instead. And I've come to, over the years, come to appreciate very much the mercy of the Grihastha ashram, that Krishna is so kind to allow us that. And think of those poor Mayavadis who must take sannyas even though their hearts are full of so many desires. One letter he wrote me, this is actually rather interesting. It was in middle of 1972, and at that time there was no plainclothes Sankirtan. Everything was straight out, saris, dhotis, tilak, here we're from Hare Krishna, please read a book about Krishna. But he wrote me a letter and he said, make sure that you sell books by preaching, not by cheating. So I was really taken aback by this. I said, well, you know, what does he mean when he says cheating? You know, what are we doing? Then I wrote and asked him, Srila Prabhupada, you mentioned sell books by preaching, not by cheating. What exactly do you mean? His reply was that if you act in consciousness that Krishna is the supreme proprietor, he is the only enjoyer, and he is the dearmost friend of all living beings, then you are never cheating. But if you act in any other consciousness, you are always cheating. So he didn't specifically address, the fact, oh, you're lying or something on Sankirtan to collect money to give out a book. But, the way I took it is Krishna is within us. And when we're on Sankirtan, we should be trying to please the super soul within us, who's within all the people we're selling the books to. At one time, I had the idea, let's try and sell the books through the bookstores. And I went and had a advertisement produced for radio for the Krishna book, and invested some Lakshmi in radio advertising, and placed the Krishna books in all the bookstores in San Diego County. And I wrote to Srila Prabhupada about that, and he wrote back, "This is very nice. Please let me know if this is successful, because if it's successful, we're prepared to spend millions and millions of dollars to advertise our books." And of course, I didn't have enough finances to do it the way it should have been done. But it was effective, at least in the fact that it put the books into all the stores, got them on display, and it had some, and of course some of them sold, but not enough in that time to justify the amount that we'd spent. But I think Srila Prabhupada liked the attempt to boldly do something. Someone told me, I heard this year that Srila Prabhupada once told them, he asked, what is humility? And Srila Prabhupada said, humility is to act boldly for Krishna. We get the idea that humility is to be very meek and quiet or submissive. But no, Prabhupada didn't say that. He said, be bold for Krishna. There's a couple of incidents that I remember clearly. One was he had a lecture at the University of San Diego. It's a Catholic school. And most of the persons attending were priests, nuns, bishops. I think there was a cardinal there, all the lay teachers of the Catholic Diocese of Southern California. There was a big crowd. My father also came. And we'd put Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana on top of a desk. And we'd put a chair, and he climbed up the chair onto the desk, onto his Vyasasana. It was in a sort of a big, lecture hall. And he began his lecture by quoting a Sanskrit sloka that I've never been able to find. And then he said, this means you are what you eat. In this age, most people are eating hogs. I never forget, I was sitting on the floor at his feet, and I was, Prabhupada, how can you say this? I couldn't believe he would speak like this to this particular audience. I could understand if he was calling the hippies, drug addicts, or whatever hogs, but he was calling this highly so-called cultured, religious, scholarly audience. He just said, you are all hogs. And I was totally dumbfounded. I looked at the faces of the other devotees. They were all dumbfounded too. Because if I had been speaking to this audience, it was the last thing I would have said. But of course, Srila Prabhupada, with having no ahamkara, on the absolute platform, he could say anything and get away with it, whereas they probably would have come up and stoned me if I had said the same thing. I never forget that. I don't remember the rest of the lecture, and I've looked for it over and over again, and I've never been able to find it. I don't think it's in the archives, or if it is, it hasn't been put in legible condition yet. On another occasion during the same visit, we had been invited to one Indian man's home. And Srila Prabhupada went, and we had some prasadam. We ate there. I don't know if it was prasadam, but then Srila Prabhupada and this gentleman, whose name was Dr. Duvari, began a philosophical discussion. Dr. Duvari was presenting every variety of Western philosophy, atheist philosophy, and so forth, and Srila Prabhupada was countering him. And the conversation began at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. And it went on and on and on. It's finally about 11:30 at night. And it's still going on. And there were 3 or 4 of us sitting there. We didn't say a word the whole time. We were just sitting, watching Srila Prabhupada and listening. And finally, Srila Prabhupada became exasperated with this man. And he just said, you're a fool. A mudha such as you I've never seen before. I've never met such a complete fool. And he started pounding him like this, because the man wouldn't submit. And then finally, Dr. Duvari laid down and put his head on Srila Prabhupada's feet, and he submitted. And since then, his entire family became Vaishnavas, and they became I was just in San Diego, and their family and their family's family, they're still the biggest supporters of the San Diego temple. In 1970, this was during the preparations for the Rath Yatra, and I was working in Berkeley. Devotees were working in Berkeley cutting fruit for huge fruit salad. And early morning, we didn't get much sleep, maybe an hour, hour and a half. We got up in the morning, we were doing a small morning program. And we were sitting in the temple room reciting the Guru Vastak prayers in English. And suddenly Srila Prabhupada came in the room. We had no idea that he was coming. It was spontaneous. He arrived at the temple and he sat down on his Vyasasan. And he just said, continue doing what you're doing. So we're reciting, and we recited, the spiritual master is very satisfied when he sees the devotees eating Bhagavad Prasadam. And Srila Prabhupada, he said, yes, this is the best part. We're die, Prabhupada. This is in 1972, just at the time Srila Prabhupada came to the San Diego temple. There was one devotee in San Francisco. I think his name was Devarshi. And he'd become a little bit famous as a very expert seller of Back to Godhead magazines. But somehow or other he had had a minor fall down, I think a sexual liaison of some sort, and the temple president in San Francisco had kicked him out of the temple because of this. And he was sort of lost, and he was wandering around, and the San Francisco temple president was calling out, don't let this Devarshi in, he's a rogue, he had sex. And he called me, but then Devarshi shows up in the front door of the San Diego temple. And I had a hard time keeping anyone out. Srila Prabhupada was there. And Devarshi's sitting on the front lawn, wanting to come in. I said, why don't you come see Srila Prabhupada? He came in, and he explained something to Srila Prabhupada about what had happened and how he wasn't welcome in the temples anymore. Nobody liked him. Prabhupada said, you come and travel with me. So this is the example of his compassion. Nobody else wanted him, then come and travel with me, I want you. He didn't reject anyone. Of course, during that time we would walk with Srila Prabhupada, not often because there was a number of devotees wanting to walk with him, but once every 10 days or once every 2 weeks you'd get to go on the morning walk. And I don't have great recollection of the conversations. I remember that at one time he was indicating that the day will come when the Krishna consciousness movement will be so powerful that if someone doesn't chant, we will shoot them. Sometimes people don't like it when I say that story, but I remember it very, very distinctly that Srila Prabhupada was fully confident that Krishna consciousness would be established as the Dharma of the age, and that it would spread throughout the whole world, would become the universal religion, and it was simply a matter of time. Of course, he never indicated how much time that would be. We always, the Christians have been saying Jesus is going to come again every year for the last 2,000 years, so I think we're also thinking that, in the next 10 years the world's going to end, and by magic Krishna consciousness is going to spread. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but we can be confident and assured that this is the Yuga Dharma and it will spread, and we should take part in it. We had organized a festival in Balboa Park in the Starlight Opera Theater. I think it was on July 1st, 1970. We tried to advertise and promote it, but unfortunately not a lot of people came. But still there was a reasonable crowd. And Srila Prabhupada was sitting on the stage on his Vyasasan, and he started to lecture about Lord Chaitanya. And as his lecture began, some drunk hippie in the audience started screaming, "We want sex! We love sex! 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 We want sex!" And Srila Prabhupada leaned over, he said, "What is he saying?" I said, "Srila Prabhupada, he says he wants sex." So Srila Prabhupada stopped his lecture, and he changed and he spoke about sex and the real purpose of sex and spiritual sex and so forth. And that was quite amazing. That lecture is recorded, it is in the archives, and you can hear that. There was a nice incident. The next day, Mr. Joshi, who was a Punjabi magistrate, retired, lived in the Berkeley area, across the San Francisco Bay, had invited Srila Prabhupada to come for lunch. It was a sort of a traditional thing. Every time Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco, he would go to Mr. Joshi's for lunch. Mr. Joshi would greet him with a garland of $1 bills. We'd all criticize Mr. Joshi, why you're not giving $100 bills. And Mr. Joshi would wash Prabhupada's feet. He'd wash all the devotees' feet, and he'd sit us down. But at the time, my body was feeling wiped out. I'd been working hard for this Rath Yatra for a number of weeks, and it seemed like after every festival, the body would collapse. And I remember sitting down for prasadam, and I just felt horrible. But I hadn't said anything to anyone. I just was determined I'm just going to grit it out, you know. But Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he said, Bhaktadas, you're not feeling well? I said, Srila Prabhupada, I'm a little bit sick. And he said, you go take rest. You have worked hard. Now, take rest. Yes, Srila Prabhupada. Paid my obeisances, and I walked into a bedroom in the back and laid down and passed out. And after some time, I heard some noise, and I look up. Srila Prabhupada was coming in. And so I jump out of the bed and fall down at his feet and pay my dandavats, and I start to walk out of the room. And Prabhupada he says, take rest. You've worked hard. Take rest. Yes, Srila Prabhupada. So I got back in the bed. And there was 2 twin beds right next to each other. And I was in the one on the right. And Mr. Joshi came and he pulled back the covers of the other bed. And Srila Prabhupada crawled in. And then Mr. Joshi tucked Srila Prabhupada in like he was a small child. It was very sweet. And so, I mean, the 2 beds were maybe 18 inches apart or less. And my head was here and Prabhupada's head was there. We took a nap. And of course, for me, it wasn't an ordinary nap. It was a Goloka nap, Yoga Nidra nap. Very extraordinary. But I think it can show us how much compassion, how much sensitive, how much caring Srila Prabhupada was for the devotees, and how he didn't carry an air that, hey, I'm the guru and you're a nobody, you go get out there on the floor and I'm taking the bed. He was actually equal to everyone. Of course, I saw him, he's God to me, but the kindness is what was overwhelming. And always when I think of Srila Prabhupada, every time he ever saw me, the first thing he would say is, Bhaktadas, are you happy? He's always concerned, are you happy? And of course, I was always happy when I was with Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes before I went to see him, I was, but always when you'd see him, everything disappeared. All problems evaporated. There weren't any problems in his presence. I wanted to bring Jayananda to, all the devotees of San Francisco wanted to have a darshan of Srila Prabhupada. Most of them had never seen him, and they'd worked so hard. So I gathered most of the local devotees and brought them to Srila Prabhupada's room. And I wanted to bring Jayananda. Jayananda kept saying, I'm too busy, I don't have time, I have to work. And I grabbed him, I said, you're coming, you're going to go see your spiritual master, and I threw him in the car and drove him over. And Prabhupada was staying in an apartment, Keshava Bharati's apartment, and we all went in together and paid our obeisances. And Jayananda sat down against the far back wall, and he went to sleep. Instantly, within moments, he was asleep. And he didn't say a word to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada didn't say a word to him. We had our darshan for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. We got up to leave, and I said, Jayananda, it's time to go. Okay, paid his obeisances, and he walked out. And I believe that was the last time Srila Prabhupada ever, or Jayananda ever, no, I guess he saw him again in 75. But it was obvious that the relationship between Srila Prabhupada and Jayananda extended far, far beyond the range of the voice or this body, that it wasn't at all dependent upon that, those conditions. Another letter that wasn't to me, but that he wrote to Ramaswar at the end of one Christmas marathon. Ramaswar had written and given him these scores, which were quite enormous. I think it was in 73 or 74. And Srila Prabhupada wrote that it's very nice you've sold so many books, congratulations, I'm very pleased. But the final sentence he said, but the highest realization is to save yourself. And when I read that, it was like a sledgehammer in my heart, because we're walking, I mean, at least we're probably, most of us are walking around thinking we're saved and we're saving others. But why is he telling us the highest thing is to save yourself? I felt that we'd become like the Christians, thinking I'm saved by the blood of Jesus and these people are all heathens and we're going to save them. We become puffed up very easily and intoxicated by ourselves. So, you know, that letter, those words have always stayed with me. Regarding the question of the origin of the jiva soul, Srila Prabhupada was constantly being asked, where did we come from? Were we originally with Krishna, and so forth? And I was with him several times when this question came up, and invariably he gave the same answer, at least when I was present, and it was that you're sick, you have a disease. Do you care how you got the disease, or do you care about getting better? So first get better, then you'll understand. That was his point. He made that point over and over and over again. So now there's so much discussion, and people are studying different scriptures, trying to say, well, we were originally with Krishna, or we came from the Brahma Jyoti, we've never been with Krishna. What is the point of speculating about it? Why not get healthy? To me, the discussion is a waste of time. And that's how Srila Prabhupada always dealt with it with us. Just get yourself healthy. Not think we're such big scholars that by studying books we're going to understand. It's not something we can understand by studying books. We've got to understand it by having it revealed to us by pure devotional service. Jai Anilo Premadana Karuna Prachu